All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this Minnesota PRSA Career Coffee event. I'm Natalie Conrad. I'm one of the volunteers for the Career Center Coffee Committee. And these events are kind of a series of events that are meant to provide a forum to kind of explore a variety of different career topics and offering an opportunity to kind of reflect, refine, and re-energize your career path. So as we all know, 2020 has been a challenge for everyone. So today we're specifically talking about career development strategies during this pandemic. Whether you're a solo consultant, you're working at an agency, a nonprofit, or if you're also working a new part-time job as being a virtual educator for your kids at home too, it's a really good time to kind of focus on career development strategies. So to get us started today, we really wanted to get a feel for where everyone is on their career path. So we're going to throw up a poll so you can kind of let us know what your status is right now. So whether you're working regularly throughout this whole time, working reduced hours, on furlough, looking for new opportunities. We'll just fill that out to get a feel for that. And then while you're filling that out, just a couple housekeeping items. If you go up to your top right corner, you can adjust the view. So you can do gallery view so you can see everyone, or if you have it in speaker view, you'll just see our speakers as they're talking. So that's kind of your preference. And then these are really meant to be more of an informal discussion. So while our two presenters are speaking, feel free to jump in with questions, and you can submit questions either in the chat window, or you can also, if you go to the participant view at the bottom of your screen, you can also raise your hand, just so we don't have a bunch of people jumping in at once. That's another good option. This is all being recorded as well. So if you're more comfortable submitting a question anonymously, you can direct message me directly, and I will read that to our group here. I can't think of anything else. And then with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers. So today we have two amazing speakers. We have Karen Kodzik. She is the president, founder, career management consultant over at Cultivating Careers. She has a master's degree in counseling with an emphasis in career development. And then we also have Liz Ryer. She's a researcher and leadership coach. She helps clients through workplace challenges. She's the author of Coach's Corner, which typically runs weekly in the Star Tribune. It's on hiatus right now. And I also wanted to congratulate Liz on just being elected to the Minnesota State House of Representatives. She is representing Egan District 51B. So that's kind of exciting too. So with that, I'm going to let our two speakers take it away.
Well, good, Natalie, thank you. You know, I'm thrilled to be here and I appreciate the invitation. Some of you look familiar to me, so it's great to see you all in this crazy virtual time. So, you know, my hope today is being able to, you know, for Liz and I to really spark a conversation and spark some thought that hopefully leave you with some, you know, not just with some insights, but, you know, some ways to kind of navigate these, you know, I don't know, what are the words you say? It's unprecedented, challenging, crazy, weird, you know, times that, you know, that we call the pandemic.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. To me, I love being out here. I love having my coach hat on. As you can tell from having my recent run for office, I wear many hats in my life. My first career was as a researcher. I still do that, working in healthcare. I've also led large complex projects in the tech world, been involved in all sorts of different aspects of work in addition to being a certified coach. So to me, it's great to be able to think about what are the ways that all of us can best align our inner selves and outer actions to be able to address the challenges that we face, because I think it's when people say, oh, no, I'm fine, there are no challenges, I think that that harms us all. And so to be able to come together and talk about what's going on inside, what's going on outside, and how do we use that to intentionally move ourselves forward. You'll notice that I always put myself in the same bucket because I've been a coach and a client, and we're all going through this. And I think that's part of the power that we have. So thank you all for being here and sharing this time with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Liz and I hope that, this really sparked a discussion. The last thing we wanted is to come and just, dump a whole bunch of content, and because really people need to share their experiences. And so we hope that you feel free, to share some of yours as well, so that we can offer, the best insights we can. So thank you for filling out the poll. I think that's a good place to start. The majority of you are in a role or maybe running your own practices, or maybe freelancing. I get that too. What's interesting is I think, we are 9 months, 10 months into this, right? And it seems like a lifetime. It seems like a lifetime. And as uh, people in general, we love predictability. It's comforting, and that is far from what we've seen in the last 10 months. So, how to navigate that, right? How to navigate that feeling. I think a good place to start that, Liz and I wanted to talk about is perspective. We sent out an agenda. I hope many of you got it. Perspective is key, because in times where everything is swirling, seemingly swirling, right? I think we really want to start by talking about perspective, because it can be incredibly anchoring to just be able to maintain some objectivity when we feel everything is happening, not just around us, but to us, whether we're business owners, whether we're in a role, whether we're, find ourselves in transition. So I want to start there. Liz, do you want to chime in before we kind of go deeper on that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, having perspective, I think, is important. And I think we'll talk about how there's variety in how people approach this. But one thing that is important to me to always remember is that the person that you are coming into this, you still have the gifts that you have. You still have the talents, the experiences, the tools that you have. Now, we may have different ways that we have to apply them. If you're a brilliant networker, you may be finding that you have to work on your tools for networking effectively in a different format. You're not going to be out in large groups and large organizations, but you still have that gift for connecting with people and so forth. So honor the gifts that you have. Don't downplay them as a resource for you going in, because I think it's really tempting to say, everything's so different and I'm not prepared. You do have tools. We all have tools. Let's think about ways, and we'll talk about how do we take those things and use them in new ways and think about them in new ways. And that'll be the meat of our conversation today.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, if there's one thing, one of the first things I hope resonates for people is maintaining perspective on the situation is your number one survival tool during this time. Interestingly, we work with people who are in jobs, and then we work with people who are in between jobs. And we talk a lot about managing the emotionality, the highs and the lows, and kind of that cycle. And what's interesting is the peaks are less high these days, and the lows are really low, and it's harder to get up to something even that feels like baseline. And so first and foremost, to say, wait a minute, I know that that's kind of part of this. Instead of just being strapped in and along for the ride and feeling like you're being tossed around, because that's really unsettling and really unnerving. And you're like, when is this ride going to stop? Right? And the thing is, we don't know. We don't know. And so, first and foremost, recognize there's going to be highs, there's going to be lows, and ask yourself number one, what do you need to do to make sure that you can get up from those dips, right? And maintain something within the neutral zone, closer to the neutral zone instead of the high points and the low points, because that will be really exhausting if you ride those high points and low points, for the year to come.
And I love that perspective because Karen talks to a lot of people who are going through a lot of different things and has such a broad view on, not just, I could speak to my N of one, we could all, or the people I know that have a different hat on as a coach than Karen does. But to me, to be able to say, oh, those lows, they do feel lower. It's not just me, it's the pattern, and not personalize that and be able to create context around that and not have the I'm feeling low, create kind of like the spinning tires that take you lower and lower, and just say, yes, this is part of it, and have context.
Right. Perspective also pertains to when you're within an organization. Organizations are going through so much change. That's an understatement. And what happens when we're inside organizations, again, we want predictability. And since March, right? Remember, right? We went into quarantine. Some organizations went into furlough. Some organizations went into layoff. Now what we're seeing inside of organizations are kind of replanning and kind of transformational thinking. And all those come with change. And employees are like, well, wait a minute, where is this going? And so what I hear from my clients is that every change is like alarming, like, oh my, they'll come and say, you're not going to believe what they just did over here. You're not going to believe now what they're doing. And my counsel is to say, okay, recognize there's going to be a lot of change in your organization. Number one. The good news, number two, is it's temporary. It's temporary. The change you're seeing today is just for now. It is not forever. So watch your reaction and maybe overreaction to it and know it's just part of the ride.
I do want to add to that, though. I hear a lot of people say, I can't wait till things go back to normal.
Yeah, right.
I think we will have a normal again, but it will not be the same normal. And I think that's a call to us to make it a better normal, to say, how do we make normal better for everyone? Because it hasn't been an even playing field for everyone in terms of what normal has been. So this is a chance too, both individually and societally, to say, how do we want things to be better? I mean, we're seeing, just for example, we're seeing that a lot of people, I'm guessing, especially people in professions in this room, are not having to commute. We're seeing improvements in air quality in many cities. As we look at the climate crisis, do we say, this is a chance to address the commuting culture that contributes to that? That's just one example. There's so many examples of ways. And then how do we build community and work together? So I'm going to put my little political hat away again, because it does keep creeping out. I just got done campaigning. But it is, I think, a chance to say, what should normal be? What do we want normal to be? Do we love the balance that we're able to have? I was listening to the radio and they were talking about people who are working more of a split shift now. They're working in the morning, they're taking some hours off in the afternoon, they're working in the evening. Are we having a siesta culture emerge? How do we want, and individually, how do we want to be in our work life, our personal life, and how can we help create that into a new normal?
Yeah. And, so Liz and I are going to talk about just kind of how we're defining this time and what we're seeing, but then we're certainly want to make sure we leave you with some strategies on how to do this and how to navigate this. To Liz's point around normal, we're coaching a lot to even removing that language out of your narrative and really using more verbiage that's called different. It's going to be different. Different is a neutral word. It's not good. It's not bad. It's neutral. It's going to be different. And just ask yourself, how are you going to embrace different? How have you in the past? Don't automatically assume. This goes back to perspective, and then I want to talk a little bit about gross generalizations. Is how are you going to approach different, moving forward? Embrace is a little strong for these days, but right, be ready for different. So that being said, secondly, Liz and I want to talk about be mindful again around both perspective and the language that is regarding kind of gross generalizations about what's happening, right? Or making gross adjustments to how you're doing what you're doing. Sometimes when we panic, so here's a great example. So I have clients that come to me and they're miserable in their jobs, they're miserable in their careers, and they'll come and they'll say, oh my gosh, that must mean I should abandon what I do and become a firefighter or something really different, or a ballerina. And a lot of times I say, well, wait a minute, let's dial it back a little bit and see what's going on. And sometimes subtle adjustments can be enough. So, it's common for people to say, if you're in transition, for people to say, there's no jobs out there, nobody's hiring, it's hard. Those are gross generalizations. So my invitation to you is watch your language, watch how you're fueling that, because facts are not supporting that.
Yeah, and as a coach focusing more on leadership in the personal development side, complementing Karen's career focus, I think that's the same, is that I hear people just feeling like they need to change everything in their life and move and find a new partner and make all kinds of big life changes. And it's like, now is the time to be reflective, take a step back and say, let me count to 10. Let me sleep on this. Let me take a few deep breaths.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Every skill you have at your disposal to not make decisions impulsively that won't serve you. Certainly there is time for, you don't put all important big life changes on hold during an ongoing crisis like this. I mean, this is not a short-term crisis. This is a long span thing that we're dealing with. You can't put everything on hold, but you can be reflective and intentional. And that's the encouragement that I would offer.
Yeah, we coach a ton to intentionality, because it puts you in the driver's seat. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, about how do you regain your power and feel empowered during this time, right? But one other thing I wanted to comment on, based on what Liz was talking about, is making big shifts. So this is specifically, to folks that are in job search and in their own practice or consulting. Sometimes, and this even pertains to cultivating careers is 16 years old, but we're, at the end of the day, we're a small business. And so in the beginning, right, when things were just really crazy and uncertain, it makes us think, okay, what do I do? Do I cast a wider net? Do I do something completely different? Should I shoot for everything? How about I'll just throw all these resumes out there and see what I catch? That's a bad strategy because it's not focused, and it signals to the market you don't know what you want. It's hard to be competitive, whether you're a job seeker, whether you're a business owner competing for business, if you come and say, I can do everything. We can't. None of us can do everything. So watch that overgeneralization and that tactic that sometimes follows it of, again, that broad sweeping, I'm going to shoot for everything. I'm going to try to be a jack of all trades. That's a Jill of all trades. It's not always the best strategy.
I think then we should also talk about, this is not the same situation for everybody. We're all in different situations. We have people who are empty nesters who are now working from home, don't have the same pressures, but they do have pressures, but not the same as someone who is a working family, maybe 2 income home workers with kids in distance learning, a whole different set of pressures versus essential workers who need to be out at their work, healthcare workers, retail workers, and others whose kids are at home in distance learning. And so the pressures that we're all facing vary a lot, and that calls for both recognition of what's going on, compassion for ourselves and others, and an open-mindedness and a non-judgmental approach. If I could do one thing in life, I would remove the word should from everybody's vocabulary. I should be able to do this. I should be doing that. They should be doing this. They should be doing that. Take it out, because to me, that's just one of the most damaging concepts. We all do the best we can, and we all need to do different things depending on our circumstances, our temperament, our internal needs. Extroverts in this time need really different things than introverts. My husband and I are both introverts. We're both kind of like, hey, we get to stay home. But my extroverted sister-in-law is going bananas. And so, it's like, know that, understand that, accept that in yourself, accept it in others.
Yeah, I think, acknowledging that everybody's going through this differently. And what's interesting is, for clients that we talk to that are in jobs, they're either bored because their job is so different and they can't do the full capacity of their work. And they're like, well, how do I contribute? How do I stay engaged? Or they're overloaded and sometimes pulled out of scope of what they do, because organizations are scrambling around just trying to keep things going. And I think of my clients who are like in essential industries, like healthcare, it's like, oh my gosh, their hair is on fire. And so it's important to, recognize that everybody's going through this differently. And that's okay for now, because it's not going to be like that forever. For people that have more space, what's interesting is because many of us are working from home, it allows us more time to reflect. It allows us more time to reflect. And I think, Liz, I want you and I talk about that a little bit, because I think that's really essential. I mean, think about it. The majority of us that are working from home are saving on commute time by a couple of hours. Now, we're going to talk about people who've got kiddos at home and how that adds a whole nother layer, to all of this. But, let's talk about this time to reflect. Liz, go ahead, and then I'll let you talk, answer Andrew's question about being an introvert.
I didn't even see that. Good. I think it's a dangerous assumption to say that it gives all of us time to reflect. Because
fair. I think that's fair.
Some of us, it gives us time to reflect. And for some of us, that's welcome. Some people don't have time to reflect because they're trying to get their kid on Zoom or all of the different education things. And they're dealing with family fear about health and wellness. I mean, I think that that's a luxury to assume. And I think the interesting thing is people who fill their lives in normal times with so much activity because they're afraid to reflect. They don't like to reflect for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. And this can be causing a lot of anxiety, because untrammeled access to reflection, if you're not prepared for it, can be traumatizing. So I think there's a different level there. And I think that knowing what, that's a personal thing. It's not really about job search, but it is about how do you cope with the fear and the pressures. And I think that comes back to what's unique and individual. For people for whom that is something that's valuable and sought out, I think it does create time. And I think I heard an interesting thing where people were starting to create virtual commute times because they missed their commute time. When they would listen to books on tape, they would have time. they would have time to separate themselves from work and be on the bus or be in their car and not really be thinking about work, but not into having to get dinner on the table and the pressures of home. And so they're saying, okay, well, I'm going to take 20 minutes between when I stop working and when I emerge into my household to be able to give myself that mental space to do a transition. And so honoring those types of things is one of the things I hear, is that there's a lot of learning around how to mesh and merge working from home. I've worked from home for like the last 6 years. So to me, I've come to terms with that, but I know a lot of people haven't needed to do that. And so how do you not feel like you're working 24/7? How do you not feel like you're shorting your family, shorting your job, all of those things at once, and create some boundaries in a way that works for you and in a way that works for the people you work for and with?
Yeah. So Liz, I want to do a deeper dive on that. But Andrew, thank you for your question about being introverted. You know, Liz disclosed she's introverted, and ironically, I tell people I'm a raging introvert outside of work. I have figured out how, and people are like, what? You know, but I have figured that out in what I need energy-wise. I'm familiar with the assessment you took, Insights, and the colors. So yes, typically people who are yellow, I'm guessing your colleagues are yellow, because they're hot, they're driven by a lot of social connection, and really like to be out there. And it's, you know, what's interesting, Andrew, is managers, I don't know if you're a manager, really struggle with how do you keep teams engaged when people have different styles. And my one suggestion, and Liz, I'd love to hear a suggestion from you as well, but my one I'll throw out is connect with your teammates outside of this, you know, group chat. And reinforce that connection with them. Working from home is really hard for extroverts. You are absolutely right. So they've got to figure out creative ways to connect with one another and tap into that extroverted energy that they have got. Many people seemingly have in abundance. And what's interesting is my extroverted clients, before it turned snowy and cold, they were doing walk meetings, outside coffee meetings. You know, they were incorporating, interestingly, a lot of movement, you know, to help channel some of that energy, because they need it to be creative. You know, those folks often draw from that energy to be creative. Liz, thoughts on colleagues that are struggling, or people that are struggling because they're introverted or extroverted? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the company that I worked for, a company called GFK. It's a market research company, and we are headquartered in Germany, with other headquarters in London and New York, and people all over the country, all over the world. So my clients and my coworkers were all over the US for the first 3 years. My coworkers were all over the globe the third 3 years. We had to learn how to create virtual teams and build that connection without being able to get together very often. If we were lucky, and most people weren't, you could ever have once met face to face. But most people had never met their coworkers face to face. So we had to deal with that. We didn't have the pressure of a pandemic, so that we couldn't do real life things. But to me, one of the things is that the real loss is the running into people in the hallway, the informal. You can replicate happy hours in a sense by doing, get your cocktails or your sparkling water and get together in the, after work hours on Zoom. The thing that we did a lot of was you'd see someone was green on Messenger and just ping them. Just ping people unpredictably. Hey, just thinking about you. I see you're green. Have a minute to chat, and
I see you're green.
Yeah, that was what we said, and it was always people say, "Oh, no, I'm just heads down right now," just like they would if you were rocking past them in the hall. I don't have time now, but yeah, let's do that and build some energy around the interaction. But that takes again that word intentionality. But to me, that I found that my colleagues who were introverts like that because it gives a little control. The colleagues that were extroverts, when you reached out to them, were like, "Yay, someone reached out to me!" It was really powerful, and it sounds so simple, but it's the kind of thing you can do. And pick up the phone. Don't do everything. Use
Yes, mix it up. Mix it up.
voices. Yeah.
It is. It's people are starting to really crave relation more than ever before. Um, but before I go there, I don't want to lose the point of, as we were talking about everybody going through this differently, right? And whether it's introverts, extroverts, also people who've got different home situations. I was on a call with a great friend of mine just this past weekend, and she's got this crazy life. So get this. So she's a physician. She's a pulmonologist working in the throes of healthcare in a state where the pandemic is raging. She's a single mom of two special needs kids. And I said, is your job harder when you work in the hospital or when you're homeschooling? She's like, hands down, homeschooling. She says, I don't even know. We spend 3 hours trying to just get kids to focus. And so it gave me incredible perspective. And what it did is it called me to tap into how are we being compassionate to others in other situations? How are we showing compassion differently, whether it's to our colleagues or others during this time? And how are we tapping into self compassion? When those of us were at work, right, at home, and we're like, I just can't get the energy to get anything done here. There's no structure. I'm just having a day, right? And sometimes people have a lot of guilt and shame around that. Just say, geez, what is wrong with me? That's a great time to tap into some self-compassion. Liz, do you want to comment on
Yeah.
that, what you've seen in that area?
Yeah, and I want to take it a slightly different direction, actually, because one of the things that I'm seeing more in the news is the reaction of leadership and management to people trying to do the juggle. And so I would speak to anyone who is in a leadership role, and anyone who has leadership above them. It's tough. I mean, we're hearing things about women leaving the workforce at a higher rate because the burden
Good
of
point.
work is on them. We're hearing, and that the judgment of their management is like, can't you keep that kid quiet? Well, they've got a 1-year-old and they're doing Zoom calls and they're succeeding in getting their work done. Apparently, for some, that's not good enough. And I would say, as leaders, we need to be watching ourselves, but we also need to be calling out our peers and saying, hey, this is not how we want our organization to run. We have to have each other's backs. The best organizations are doing that. A lot of individual leaders are doing that. I am an optimist. I like to think the ones who aren't are in the minority, but it's really damaging. And so supporting and having each other's backs, having the compassion that Karen speaks of, but not just thinking it, expressing it. People need to be seen, heard, and understood. They need to feel that that is happening in their life. And I've been on so many Zoom calls where people are like, I'm so sorry, my dog is barking and my children are running through, and it's like, no, you're cool, and just giving them space to, and just say, wow, you've got your hands full, well done, just chirps people right up. And it's an easy thing to do. If they are a person with a performance issue, it doesn't have anything to do with whether there's a child who has a need in the moment. It has to do with, in general, they're not doing their work. Treat that separately if you're a leader. That's your job anyway. But don't use it with what people are going through now and trying to do their best.
Yeah, it's it's a
I was gonna say,
different.
we have 2 questions coming up, but Karen, finish what you're saying, and then we can get to the questions too.
Yeah, I was going to address Eva's question. Hey, Eva, it's good to see you and be with you here. You know, in terms of, remember how I started off our conversation with using the verbiage around different? This is a different time. This is really, and what, you know, technology doesn't help that. Even people who are pro-tech, because what it does is it takes away the relational piece to how we work. And Eva, you're right. You know, what I was just saying to somebody the other day, it's like we seem to go from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, and there's no there's not that, you know, at the end of meetings when you're in person with somebody, there's subtle cues where people start to like, okay, pack up their stuff and stand up, and that's people's cue. Okay, we're wrapping up, and you have a little segue before you go to your next meeting or you go to your office or whatever. Now we don't have that. So what's happened, to your point, is our conversations with people because of technology have gotten very transactional, because we go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So right, so how do you build that relationship? How do you build that connection with people? It's either you've got to create a different kind of structure to your meeting day, or fold in other things that aren't just work agenda related. Maybe it's, you know, I've heard 3 things out there that people are doing. One is they'll do like with their teams. I was just on a conversation with an organization I work with, and they say in their teams, instead of having it be, what are we doing and what's the status and all that, what they'll do is they'll identify a podcast that they'll all watch together or listen to together, and create a dialogue around that. And so it brings people forward in a different kind of way that isn't as tasky. I think, you know, things like that, you know, changing what you talk about helps bring that balance, if that helps. Liz, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I love ideas like that. And I think that that becomes a best practice that we can use to say, what's the new way that we want to deal with each other in our teams, is like have that be a thing. I know what happens in practices when you're really slammed. Those are the first things to go. And I think when in the current times when we really need that to have we need team cohesion in a different way, that becomes a thing that should be protected time. It shouldn't be sacrificed to the needs. There's always going to be more work to do than there is time. I think the thing I overhear my husband's Zoom calls often, and we both work from home. And his teams are very intentional about checking in with each other explicitly. How are things going? You know, what's going on in your life before they get to the tasks of the day, especially in their weekly check-in meetings. But I hear him and his coworkers looking out for each other, even in more business-oriented ones. Things going okay? You know, the kind of check-in that you do in a meeting. Oh, I know you had this thing going on with your kid. How'd that work out? And just because they're on the phone, on a conference call, or on Zoom, not letting that be a barrier. The other thing, and I understand it in a setting like this where we've got a lot of names on the screen. I have it on gallery view. But when you're with the people you're working with, if your bandwidth permits, getting over camera dislike, you know, it takes a while to not think, oh, I don't want to look at myself on the screen. But you can really make a lot of connection. I feel more connected with those of you whose faces I'm seeing in real life. And I think when you're working with people regularly, that becomes a way, because then we start to see the cues. We can see people shuffle, you know, even if you're not, you can be rolling your eyes. I mean, anyone could just be going, oh, what she's talking about. And I wouldn't know. But, you know, if Beth did that, then I would know, right? You know,
Yeah.
And I think it's important getting cues from how people look. And so using every tool that we have at our disposal to be able to connect with people.
You know, one example here here at Cultivating Careers, when the pandemic started, we moved away from in-person consultation with our clients. Typically, people come to our office, and we obviously pulled that back when we were quarantining and dialed it back considerably throughout the pandemic. And so, what I decided to do with my team is, especially in the beginning, every other week, I would create a 3-minute vid clip, and we would send it out to not just our existing clients, but everybody that's ever been a client. So that's like thousands of people over the course of years. And it was just with a thought for the day kind of thing. And we didn't know how that was going to go. And I given being an introvert, I'm like, really? Do people want Karen's vid clip in their inbox? That we were shocked by how much response we got, because they're like, it is so good to hear your voice. It is so good to see you, somebody who's familiar, and to see that you are well. And thank you for these thoughts. And so we've continued to do that, and we've committed to doing that through January, and then we'll reassess. But we were surprised at how people really just, it's like, oh my gosh, somebody familiar that isn't, just a colleague in a meeting. So yeah, that was very interesting. So what do you think, Liz? Should we give them some strategies? We talked a lot. We teed this up. Beth, I want to be sure though we answer your question first, right?
Yeah, I just on to that, because I think that's really important. The matrixing of organizations and having that meshed smoothly is a challenge in the best of times. And that was one of the things actually that led me into coaching, is I found that I loved helping operations talk to sales, talk to marketing, talk to finance, talk to IT, and find common ground. It's wonderful when that works. Strategies like what you're doing here are the way that you have the lubrication and the connection and the bonds of trust, because those are the things that erode. When you know someone, you attribute good intent more often than someone who is just a stranger who sent you an email and it's like, and you didn't hear what you wanted to hear, especially. And so building those bonds of trust that way, I think that's really like best practice example. It's really nice.
Yeah. And there's just one organization I work with. They took their meetings, and they have one that's tactical. So they have 2 leadership meetings a week. And they have one that's tactical, like, let's get through the list. And then they said, let's do one that's strictly strategy and ideation. So it has a very different look and feel. It's very much kind of whiteboard driven. And that just mixes it up enough too. And encourages people to work together in a different way.
Mm-hmm. So there's one thing that I think there's time for, and maybe we can talk about this thing that there's time for as we move forward. So I think we should switch to strategies, Karen.
Yeah, okay. So, Liz and I are colleagues, and we're also friends, and we've known each other for a really, really long time. And one thing I always admired about her column is she always set it up as a framework of the inner game and the outer game. And so, I want to start, our strategy suggestions here with, let's use that framework, right? How do you approach this time? We have all agreed all this stuff is going on. We just talked for the last half hour or so. Yes, here's the reality out there. So, okay, how do you navigate it? How do you navigate it well? How do you navigate it successfully? How do you get yourself to the other side? And I think the first strategy we'd like to offer is talking about, first you've got to start by looking inward and then outward. Liz?
Yeah, I think that's true whether you're making a plan for where you want to. I mean, it's true if you're making a plan of where you want to go on vacation as much as where you want to, is it important to you to be outside? Is it important to you to be in a bustling place? Do you have to know what you want. Same with if you're solving a problem. I can't communicate with this person. What's going on inside you? I don't know what to do with my career. What do I want? What are my values? So I think when you can clarify that and spend the time and effort, then you can move into a next stage of being able to plan. But if you don't do that work, then the chances of landing in a situation that's unsatisfying to you go up dramatically. You know, it's worth it to take the time. IT language, you know, clarify the requirements and then development. I know you're not an IT group, but you know, it's like know what your plan is, and then you really think through it.
Yeah, you know, another way to think about it too is I would say before you make any changes or consider what's going on around, you've got to approach this approach things from a place of centeredness, and it's got to start with you, right? So you know what you're about, so you can measure it against what's going on around you, right? So here's the difference. It's first and foremost, this is a great time to say, here, what's important to me now? Boy, this pandemic has really brought to the forefront that question, I think, for all of us. What's important in our life? What do we want to do in our jobs and our careers that align with what's important? So to make sure that we're making decisions based on what's important, not just what can we do, to Liz's point, what do we want to do, right? That's really different. What we can do falls into that should bucket you were talking about, Liz. But what do we want to do? And how do you start to bring some shape to that? Starting from that place is incredibly, I promise you, grounding.
It's also can be difficult to do from the inside. And I'll give you an example. I remember vividly a client from quite a few years ago, and you know, I hope I can show you this because it was very, very visceral. You have to listen to your body. You have to listen to your gut and your heart, and you can notice what's going on. So this client was going, I could do this, 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 I could do this. You know, that one thing you sparked all up, and she's like, oh, I didn't even notice. She had no idea that it was that visual. So how do you connect knowing how you're reacting? So you can, you know, there are some things you can feel it, you know, like if you breathe easier, if you start to slump, if you start to hunch, if you get tense, you can train yourself to notice those things and notice what gives you a feeling of lightness and what gives you a feeling of energy and exhilaration and, you know, let's go do it type of thing instead of, I guess I could, you know, because,
right.
but
In a good place is history will tell you. Look back on the times you were energized.
yeah.
What were your favorite projects? What were the favorite things you were involved in that really time went quickly? You looked forward to doing it, right? It was very, to Liz's point, it was very energizing.
Yeah.
Equally, what were those energy suckers, right? It's like, oh, I never have to do that again, right?
Yeah, and
Pay attention to the history. That will be a good indication of what, you know, it'll give you some clues. Go ahead, Liz.
and it can never, nobody's life is ever going to be all the good stuff and none of the crap job. You know, I would never say that, but I do think it's useful when you're going through and to say, I loved this job. You know, I loved my, you know, the job when I was doing, you know, research on such and such. And what are the parts? What are the things about it? What made me love it? Because it might have been interacting with a team of people who are cross functional. It might have been having lots of time to go deep. I might have hated the part where I had to interact with people who were cross-functional or the times I had to go deep. So I can't just say, I loved this research job. It's like, what did I like and what parts and how can I optimize and maximize? And it starts by knowing what those things are.
Right. You know, what's interesting is when you go through that exercise, and you can even do it, so in terms of tools, you can do it very simply, even by, stepping back and taking a look at the various jobs you've had throughout your career and say, what are the very, very specific things, that were involved in those jobs, and list them out. And then go through and say, yeah, here's the stuff that was awesome. Here's the good stuff. And then you can say, put in, a frowny face next to it or whatever, and say, oh, this is the stuff that, no, let's not do that. And what is that pointing to? Now's a great time when we talk about assessment. Now's a time to do a little more of that professional development, that personal development, whether it's through podcasts, whether it's through articles, whether it's through a different kind, a book that helps you think through that. This is a great time, especially since organizations might be asking you to contribute differently. If they say, hey, why don't you do this? You've got to know yourself to be able to say, absolutely, sign me up. Or like, what are my other choices? If I have other choices. Okay.
And if you're an extrovert, find other people to talk to and say, I'm doing this. Do you want to do this with me? We could do it together. It'll be fun. Find a couple of people who want to do that type of analysis, obviously that you trust. Because for me, I'll go read a book, listen to a podcast, or go to articles and happily go off to my room by myself. But my extrovert friends think better when they're thinking in concert with people. And so, that takes vulnerability, that takes a risk. And I was like, I'm just doing this thing, and you want to do this thing with me. You can share as much or as little as you want. I'm curious how many people on this call would identify as introvert and extrovert.
Yeah, if you could do a poll, that would be great.
Yeah, just curiosity, or raise your little virtual hand.
Oh, your hands, right? Yeah.
And have extroverts raise their hands on the thing because they're the ones who want to say, right?
Exactly. So while people are kind of chiming in, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Knowing yourself is how you gauge what good looks like. People come to me all the time and say, is this a good job? And I say it might be. It doesn't mean it's the right job for you. And so as you assess what are your options, right? Whether it's within your organization, within your job, within your overall career path, you first have to know yourself to be able to compare it against the different options so you know what's good and what's not so good. And then making sure you're choosing things in alignment with your energy, whether you're introverted or extroverted. There's a good friend and colleague of mine calls herself an omnivert. She hovers between extrovert and introvert. There are tendencies. And, this introvert extrovert thing comes very much from the Myers-Briggs assessment. And if any of you have ever taken it, it really gives you a kind of a scale. So people can either be way over to one side or you can hover in the middle. In certain situations, you show up extroverted, you show up introverted. I think one of my favorite books was very interesting, and this might be an interesting development book since we're talking introverted, extroverted here. A good friend of mine handed me the book Quiet. And she said, I want you to read this and tell me if it rings true for introverts. It's called Quiet. It's How to Be an Introvert in an Extroverted World. It's by Susan Cain. And she says, this way I'll know how to deal with you. I said, okay, thanks. And I read it and I thought it was very, very well done. I believe the author initially was a journalist, if I remember right. So that could be, I don't know if anybody's ever read it, but I think it offers some great insight, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert.
And I think one of the things to me that was, I'm certified in administering Myers-Briggs, and one of the things that was interesting to me in learning more about it was how people often think that introvert and extrovert refer to how social you are. I am a highly social introvert. And because, I love talking to people. I'm a researcher, I'm curious. I'm a coach, I'm curious. But I get my energy being able to go back and recharge yourself, where you get your energy. And so I think that's a really important distinction, because I see that in the comments that people are placing, and I would argue perhaps or propose that maybe someone who's like an introvert outside of work but extroverted at work.
Yeah. I think it's really important to know yourself. I think it's really important to know yourself. So as you're making decisions about your jobs, your careers, your life, choose things that align with that. Choose things that align with that. What's interesting is, so in our coaching practice, we work one-on-one with people. And that is because I'm such an introvert. I've got colleagues that do just training and facilitation. And though we can do that, and I have done that in my career, by the end of the day, I would be exhausted if I was always in front of a group all day long. So I made that decision when I started my practice. This is what my energy leans towards. And though I'll stretch myself, I know when it's too far over. It's just not good. And so I'd invite you to do the same, to tune into that energy and say, what kinds of things do I need to be doing so that it draws from the energy I have versus counter to that energy, because then it's too exhausting.
So we have about 15 minutes left. And so I would like to suggest that we move into the next strategies so that we can at least give a sense of all of them before we have to wrap up. So anything you'd want to add, Karen, to the values and the knowing yourself before we move into path and plan, and how do you do this? Because I think that leaving folks with like, here's what you can do going forward. Hard to hear me?
Yes, your volume is low. So ask me that again.
Really? Is that changed?
A little bit.
Oh, weird. I don't know why that would have been. I haven't.
Oh, there you go. You're better now. Maybe you just need to be closer.
Okay. Yeah, good. Thanks for saying something. Yeah, so I was doing a time check to make
Got
sure
it.
if we have.
So yes, we're at 15 minutes. So let's talk about that, right? So let's, you want to take a look now, right? We're talking about strategies during pandemic. Start with yourself. We've talked about that. Tune into your style, tune into your energy. Assess your values, right? What's important at this time. Assess your skills. What skills do you have? What skills do you want to continue to use? What skills also do you want to learn? That's one thing we've not touched on yet. There might be some gaps that it's like, well, wait a minute, now's the perfect time to learn and add to your toolkit. So that when we all come out on the other side of it, it's been enriching, it's been fulfilling, you're coming out with a fresh toolkit, not just a tired toolkit. Fair enough. It can be learning a brand new skill. It could be bolstering an old skill.
And there
Liz and I also are huge proponents of your network. Build your visibility. Tune into not only what is your reputation, but what do you want your reputation to be? That's about qualities, right? What do you want to be known for? And then do your actions and do the things that you do to align with that. So let's talk a little bit about networking, since you just have done a ton of it on the campaign trail.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things I'd say. There are different ways of networking. One is to be reaching out to people you don't know, and finding the energy to do that, and taking the risk that some people will say, I don't have time to talk to you. I don't have interest in talking to you. Even before I was campaigning, though, I learned pretty quickly that people are often just flattered to be asked. Tell me about your work life. How did you get where you are? What does it take what have you found it takes to be successful? The proverbial informational interview, but you can do that inside your organization you can ask people for connections, that type of thing. Interestingly, I think the pandemic has, I've heard from my research colleagues that it's driven up response rates in phone surveys because people are so happy to take advantage of that. But one of the things that I think touches on both networking and skills is that we all get to know each other better when we work on things. I think that's a pretty safe generalization to make. When you actually have a task to accomplish, you learn more about the project managers or the other people in different disciplines or your coworkers than you do if you're just getting together for a let's get to know each other meet and greet. Get on special projects, create special projects, say, this is a time that we could be looking at our process for X, Y, or Z. And take that forward, because then you can develop new skills. You can see things that you might like doing it. It's almost like giving a new role a test run. And it also builds your visibility within an organization. It keeps you feeling connected. There's just so much to like, and it helps your company too, especially if you're one that's affected by a slowdown. Or, I mean, if you're one that's really strapped and you need to find better ways. So I think there's just a lot to be said about doing that type of opportunity creation. And I hope that would.
Yeah, I think, the best career management strategy I can give to someone is job security comes, number one, with the transferability of your skills. How can they transfer? And how robust your network is. People that have very robust networks never worry about job security, even if the job they're in goes away. And the word networking often makes us introverts kind of go, please don't make me. And where I've come to peace with that is to say, it's not about networking. This is about relationship, and it's about informing. So when I step into a networking conversation, I'm approaching it from, I want to get to know you, and I want you to get to know me. And that's really what's at the basis of networking.
I think that's really, I'm just saying goodbye to Sarah. I think that's a great point, because I think networking is just, it also sounds manipulative to people, and it can be. We've all been networked, I think. Is my sound better now that I'm hovering closer to the keyboard? Okay. I think we've all been, had people who didn't really want to talk to us. They wanted to talk to our position and what we could do for them. Don't be them, when you're thinking about relationships.
Don't be a taker, right? Is that what they call it? Don't be a taker.
Yeah. When you're talking about relationship and forming connection, that comes through, that authenticity. Even if you have a shared interest, there's a practical side. We're in the work world here, but it doesn't have to be centered around what can I get from you? And when you can walk away from that feeling that you're being a taker just by approaching someone, you're going to feel more free. I know I did. And again, as an introvert who spent a few years in a sales role, that was an interesting thing to learn. And then, of course, running for office is a very interesting thing to learn.
Yeah, I think here's one thing that it's hard for people to accept because it doesn't seem fair, but I know, you have all likely seen this in your time working, is jobs and opportunities, whether it's jobs inside your organization or jobs outside, go to people who are liked and connected. They're not always given to people who are the most skilled or have the best experience. And I know that doesn't feel fair and that doesn't feel right, but that's the way it is. And so how do you become that person that people know and like and will open doors for? It's through networking and establishing those relationships and informing people.
I also think that like I want to do a shout out to the 20-minute networking books, Marsha's books.
Marsha Ballinger. Yeah, Marsha Ballinger, Nate Perez. They do it. Yeah, they do a nice job with that
Well, and the
book.
thing that I found in my professional life is the books were very good for networking and giving a structure. They were also very good for non-networking conversations. There's a lot of value in the structure she uses. And I think one of the most important things at the end, if it's not something that you would think about, is to say, what can I do for you? How can I help you? What are some things, it's even in just a very standard networking meeting, to be a giver right from the beginning. You know, are there people that I know? Are there things, you know, is there information I have, or even just leaving an open door for coming back and asking? I think setting it up to be a reciprocal relationship from the beginning. But I think it's a really powerful book, and I highly recommend it.
So I agree. You know, a shout out to Marsha. We want to give you a chance to ask us questions. We're 10 minutes to our stop time. And so we want, you know, I know we covered a lot today. It's been a great conversation. You know, what can we answer for you in our time together? Let's see.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Because yeah.
Yeah, one of my jobs, I was frustrated because I didn't feel like I was good at it. I didn't hire you for your skills. I hired you for your attitude. And I think that goes back to, thank you very much for the comment. I think that goes right back to Karen's comment about people hire people whom they like. And when you go in and you're willing to go in and try and be a positive force, there's nothing worse than the really, really brilliant and skilled person who has a toxic attitude and personality. They can bring down a team in record time.
Yeah. Here's a question from somebody who's has hung their shingle as a freelancer. It is hard to network right now, right? Because there aren't events out there, happy hours. My suggestion there is to be very surgical in your approach. I borrowed that term from Tim Walls. Very surgical in your approach. As to who do you want to talk to? And you're like, well, maybe I don't know. So maybe you start with your core group of colleagues, advocates, your own champions, and say, hey, here is who I need to meet, or here's who needs to know I'm out there that could maybe hire me as a freelancer. I'm looking for blank. I've got a client who just started her own practice product, so to speak, and she is a prototype of here's the kind of leaders I want to hire me for this project that she has. So she sent that out to her general network to say, who do you know fits this profile that I should meet or should be talking to? So it's got to be a much more surgical approach because our options to connect with people in different social situations is different.
So the question with everything virtually these days, what's the best way to connect in a sales role? It is very hit and miss, but it always is in a sales role, right? I mean, people like different things and I like different interactions. But what I'm finding is like Karen's point about, I liked seeing your face and hearing your voice in your short video. I think there could be value in exploring video more. We did a lot of that in the campaign in terms of just having a YouTube channel. We didn't put a lot of things out there. We didn't, you know, we did what we needed to, but people like being able to go back. So finding a way to say, you know, this is, I'm selling a ability to do crisis management type of PR campaign, for example. A quick thing about, you know, let me tell you about a time that I, in 45 to 60 seconds, and then putting a link, and then you can give people a link. You don't have the scary thing that they have to open, or you can just direct them to your YouTube channel and say, you know, a lot of things that you might be dealing with are this. Here's me talking about it. Would love to set up time, you know, and start using technology as robustly as you can. I have always liked the email to say I'm going to call and then call, so that they know it's coming. I think but using the phoning, again, I'm finding that people like to talk more than they used to. When I was doing 100 calls a day, and people, when I would reach them, it was about 15% of the time, depending on the population, were like, oh yeah, and I'm excited to talk to you. Now, it might have been my, you know, volunteers on my campaign weren't necessarily getting the same response, you know, so you have to be, and I didn't get that same response rate when I was in sales, so I'm going to tell you. So I think there's a halo of being the actual candidate and having, you know, that connection, and that feels valuable to people, but make it valuable for people to want to talk to you. Create what, also what Karen was talking about, the thing that you offer the most. You know, what is the thing that you offer the most that is your hook for people to want to talk to you, and build your status around that, you know, have articles out there, blog about it, and then use that to develop your expertise so people can say, oh, I want to talk to this person because they know about this thing that I need to know.
Yeah. Sarah has a question about, she's a new grad. The job market is, it's challenging, but it's not dried up. We have seen people land at a trickle kind of. And so the key there is, number one, to have a really good job search strategy. Know what you want. Make sure your collateral supports what you want. Have a game plan for your job search. And the key, the secret sauce, is sustained, effective activity. It will get you there. We have had, since March, 30% of our clients land, and they're in various functions, various levels. And that is an incredible, I mean, I couldn't have anticipated that. But it says you've got to hang in there. It will not be fast. It will not be easy. Job search isn't easy. It's not fun. I wish I could promise people it is. It's not. But you've got to hang in there, and sustained effort is the secret sauce. So good luck.
Yeah. And the hard thing about that is that you don't have a deadline. You don't know when it's going to end.
Right.
With an election, you know it's going to end, and it's going to be one way or the other. But with a job search, which I've also been doing, you don't know when it's going to end. And so you have to find a different level of reserves and persistence to be able to have that. So develop ways that you get energized. Don't live it 24/7. Treat it as something that you do as a consistent, ongoing effort. And then live other aspects of your life that energize you, even within the framework of a pandemic and social distancing and all of that.
I just wanted to thank everyone for joining the call this morning, and for your comments and your input. My hope, and I'm sure Liz would echo this, that, you know, we wish you well in your role and in what lies ahead. And please remember, though seemingly endless, this time is temporary.
Yeah. Yeah. My thanks to you all as well. This has really been a pleasure, because I think for me, I always walk away from talking about these things, learning more than I say, and, you know, learning from your questions, learning from your input, learning from Karen, as I always do. And so I thank you. I thank Natalie and Kara for the opportunity. And also feel free to reach out. My email is liz@deliverchange.com. And, you know, if you have follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Right. And don't hesitate to email me either directly at Karen@cultivatingcareers.com. Anybody who reaches out, we're happy to share with you one of our Navigating Through Now What books that we wrote. a handful of years ago. And so we're happy to offer that as a give back for the opportunity to come in and share your time this morning.
Actually, I would just add one thing too. If you're interested in past columns, a lot of the things that we've talked about today are talked about in the column. You can just Google Star Tribune and Liz Ryer, and it'll take you to the page. There aren't new ones coming out, but there's 10 years worth of things. So there are topics there. I've written about networking a lot of times, for example. Just do a Google search and you'll find stuff.
I just wanted to thank Karen and Liz for being our awesome speakers today and sharing all their knowledge, and to thank all of you for attending today and asking some great questions and participating in the discussion. We really appreciate it. This is the last PRSA Career Coffee of this year. So we're currently planning out events for next year. If you have any ideas, feel free to reach out to us. And as Karen mentioned, you can reach out to her to get a copy of her book. I dropped some info on that in chat, but we will include some info on that in the follow-up email too. So, and this was recorded, so feel free to go back and watch it again or share it with your colleagues if you think it'll be helpful for them as well. And with that, yeah, thanks again, and everyone have a great weekend. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.